The granite chip fell from the chisel and landed at her feet, a small white fragment that looked nothing like justice, but felt closer than anything she had seen in 9 months. Fenna Cray stood at the counter of the county clerk's office with her shoulders square and her hands folded in front of her, watching the newest clerk rifle through the same cabinet where her freedom papers should have been filed 3 times before. The green skin of her knuckles had gone pale from how tightly she gripped her own fingers, and the small tusks that curved up from her lower jaw pressed into her top lip as she held her breath. This was the 3rd time, the 3rd clerk, the 3rd set of promises that her legally granted manumission from bonded labor would be waiting, certified and sealed, ready for her to carry as proof that she was no longer property but a person with rights under the law. "I am sorry," the clerk said, and his voice carried the same hollow tone the others had used. "There is no record here. That is impossible." Fenna heard her own voice come out steady even though her chest felt like it was caving in. "I was told in spring that the papers were filed. Then in summer I was told they had been refiled. Then in autumn I was told they were being recopied because of water damage. It is winter now. Where are they?" The clerk spread his hands in a gesture that might have been sympathy if his eyes had not slid away from hers so quickly. "Perhaps there was an error in the original filing. You will need to petition the magistrate again for a new certification." "I cannot petition again. I have no coin left for the fees." Fenna leaned forward slightly, not enough to seem threatening but enough that he had to look at her. "I paid every fee. I fulfilled every requirement of my bond. 5 years of labor to the Hendry estate, finished last spring when the contract expired. My freedom is not a favor, it is law." "Then the law will sort it out," the clerk said, and he closed the cabinet with a finality that said the conversation was over. "Good day." Fenna did not move. She could not make herself move. Behind her, she heard the shuffle of other people waiting, the clearing of throats and the scrape of boots on the wooden floor. And she knew she was holding up the line, but she could not step aside, because stepping aside meant accepting that her name had been erased again. Her freedom had been erased again. And Theron Hendry, the man whose fields she had plowed and whose barns she had built and whose harvest she had brought in for 5 years, would continue to show up at her door demanding labor as though the bond had never ended, because without the papers she had no proof it had. "Next," the clerk called, looking past her. Fenna turned. Her legs felt numb. She saw the faces of the people in line and most of them looked away, uncomfortable or indifferent, but one man met her gaze and held it. He was tall, perhaps 30 years old, with dark hair that fell to his shoulders and hands that were scarred and dusty with white powder. A stonemason, she thought, from the look of him. He did not smile or frown. He simply looked at her with an expression that she could not read, and then he stepped around her to approach the counter. She walked out into the cold. The town square of Millridge was small and practical. A rectangle of packed earth surrounded by shops and the county hall and the tavern where workers gathered after the day's labor. Fenna stood in the center of it and felt the winter wind cut through her coat, which was too thin because she had sold her heavier one to pay the second round of filing fees. She had a small house now, a place she rented at the edge of town with the wages she earned doing whatever work she could find, mending fences, hauling stone, splitting firewood, but those wages were uncertain because anyone who wanted to could claim she was still bonded and refuse to pay her. Without the papers, she was in a kind of limbo, not slave but not free, and Theron Hendry exploited that limbo with a viciousness that took her breath away. He had appeared at her door 4 times since summer. Each time he had brought a contract he claimed she had signed, a contract that supposedly extended her bond another year, and each time she had refused to acknowledge it because she had signed no such thing. But without her freedom papers to prove the original bond had ended, she could not prove the new contract was a forgery. The magistrate had told her to produce her documentation. She had tried, and tried, and tried. Fenna walked home as the sun set, turning the sky the color of a bruise. Her house was one room with a fireplace and a loft where she slept, and it sat at the end of a dirt lane that turned to mud whenever it rained. She built up the fire and made a thin soup from the vegetables she had left, and she sat at her small table and tried to think of what to do next. Petition the magistrate again, the clerk had said, but the magistrate required a fee and a sponsor, someone with standing in the town who would vouch that her claim was legitimate. She had no sponsor. She had no friends here, not really. She had co-workers and neighbors who were kind enough when they saw her, but who did not want to entangle themselves in a legal fight with someone like Theron Hendry, who owned half the farmland in the county and had the ear of the regional governor. She thought about running. Leaving Millridge entirely, going west to the frontier territories, where no one checked papers and no one cared what you had been. But running meant abandoning the life she had started to build, and it meant admitting that the law was a lie, that all the promises about justice and rights were just words that dissolved when someone powerful wanted them to. Fenna put her head in her hands and did not let herself cry. A knock came at the door 3 hours later when the night had gone fully dark and the fire had burned down to embers. Fenna stood up slowly, her heart hammering because a knock at this hour was never good news. She thought of Theron Hendry. She thought of the clerks. She thought of the constable, coming to tell her that without proof of freedom she was being detained as a fugitive from bond. She opened the door. The stonemason from the clerk's office stood on her threshold, and he was carrying something wrapped in canvas. "I am sorry to come so late," he said. His voice was low and quiet, the kind of voice that did not carry but that you wanted to lean closer to hear. "My name is Alder Xan. I was at the clerk's office today. I remember." Fenna did not open the door wider. "What do you want to give you this?" Alder shifted the canvas bundle, and Fenna saw that it was heavy from the way his arms tensed. "May I bring it inside? It is fragile." Fenna hesitated, and then she stepped back. Alder entered and moved to the table, where he set the bundle down with care. He unwrapped it slowly, folding back the canvas to reveal a slab of granite about 2 feet wide and 3 feet tall, smooth and pale gray. Fenna stared at it, not understanding, and then Alder turned it so that the surface faced her. Carved into the stone in crisp, elegant letters was her name. Fenna Cray. Below it, in smaller text, were the words of a legal document. On this day, the 5th of Greening in the year of the Falcon, the bonded labor contract between Fenna Cray and Theron Hendry of Millridge County is declared complete and fulfilled. Fenna Cray is hereby free of all obligation and is recognized as a free person under the law of the realm, with all rights and protections therein. The carving went on, listing the terms of her original bond, the date it had ended, the magistrate who had signed the release, and the seal of the county clerk's office, reproduced in painstaking detail. Fenna could not speak. She reached out and touched the stone, tracing the letters of her name with one finger. The granite was cold and solid, and the carving was deep enough that she could feel the edges of each letter, sharp and permanent. "This is my freedom paper," she said finally, and her voice cracked. "Yes." Alder stood with his hands at his sides, watching her. "I went to the magistrate after I left the clerk's office and asked to see the original record of your release. It is still on file in his private ledger. He granted me permission to copy it. Why? Because parchment can be lost." Alder's gaze was steady. "Stone cannot." Fenna looked at him, this stranger who had spent hours carving her freedom into granite, and she did not know what to say. She wanted to ask why he had done this, why he had spent his time and his skill on someone he did not know, but the question felt too big and too small at the same time. Instead, she said, "How much do I owe you?" "Nothing." "This must have taken you all evening. You deserve payment." "I do not want payment." Alder's voice was firm but not unkind. "I want you to take this to the county hall tomorrow and present it as your proof. The magistrate will not be able to deny it. They will say stone is not a valid form of record. Let them say it." Alder picked up the canvas and folded it neatly, his hands moving with the precision of someone who had done the same task 1,000 times. "I am a master stonemason, certified by the Craftsmen's Guild. My carvings are used for legal boundary markers, for gravestones, for the cornerstones of public buildings. If they say this is not valid, they are saying that every marker I have ever made is not valid, and the Guild will have questions about that." Fenna stared at him. "You would fight the county clerks for me. I would fight anyone who tries to erase the truth." Alder met her eyes, and for the first time she saw something flicker in his expression, a tightness around his mouth that might have been anger. "I watched them dismiss you today. I have watched them dismiss others. It is a cruelty that pretends to be procedure, and I am tired of watching it." Fenna felt something loosen in her chest, a knot she had been carrying since spring. She looked down at the stone again, at her name carved in letters that would outlast her lifetime, and she thought that this was the first time anyone had treated her freedom as something worth preserving. Not as a favor, not as a courtesy, as a fact that deserved to be written in stone. "Thank you," she said, and the words felt desperately inadequate. Alder nodded. He moved toward the door, but Fenna spoke before he could leave. "Wait, what if they still refuse? What if they say the stone means nothing?" "Then we will make them say it in front of witnesses," Alder said. "And we will go from there." He left, and Fenna stood alone in her small house with the granite slab on her table, and for the first time in 9 months she let herself believe that she might actually win. She carried the stone to the county hall the next morning, wrapped in the canvas and balanced against her hip. It was heavy enough that her arms ached by the time she reached the square, but she did not set it down. She walked into the clerk's office and placed it on the counter with a solid thunk that made the clerk from yesterday look up in alarm. "I am here to register my freedom papers," Fenna said. The clerk stared at the stone. "What is this?" "My proof of manumission." Fenna unwrapped the canvas and turned the slab so that he could read it. "Carved by Master Alder Xan of the Craftsmen's Guild. It contains all the information from the original document that your office has lost 3 times. The clerk's face went pale and then red. "This is not proper procedure. Records must be kept on parchment and filed in the parchment that you have lost 3 times, Fenna interrupted. She kept her voice calm, but she let steel creep into it. "This is stone. It will not be lost. Will it?" The clerk opened his mouth, closed it, and then turned and disappeared into the back room. Fenna waited. Behind her, the line of people waiting for service began to murmur, and she heard someone say, "Is that her freedom carved into rock?" And someone else respond, "Clever girl." The clerk returned with an older man in tow, someone Fenna recognized as the head clerk, a thin man with gray hair and a pinched expression. He looked at the stone and his mouth tightened into a line. "This is highly irregular," he said. "So is losing legal documents 3 times, Fenna replied. The head clerk's eyes narrowed. "Are you accusing this office of misconduct?" "I am stating facts." Fenna gestured to the stone. "I have fulfilled the law. I have brought proof. Will you deny it?" The head clerk looked at the carving for a long moment, and Fenna saw the calculation in his eyes. He was weighing the cost of refusing her against the cost of accepting the stone. And she knew that the cost of refusal had just gone up, because this was not a piece of parchment he could quietly dispose of. This was a public object, carved by a guild master, and if he rejected it, he would have to explain why in front of everyone in the office. "Wait here," he said finally, and he took the stone into the back room. Fenna waited. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. Minutes passed, and then a quarter of an hour, and then the head clerk returned with the stone and a sour expression. "This will be accepted as provisional proof," he said, "pending verification." "Verification of what?" Fenna asked. "The magistrate's seal is carved into it." "Are you saying the magistrate's seal is not valid?" The head clerk's jaw worked. "Pending verification that the carving is accurate." "Then send someone to verify it," Fenna said. "I will wait." The head clerk looked like he wanted to argue, but he did not. He turned and snapped an order to one of the younger clerks, who scurried out of the office toward the magistrate's building across the square. Fenna stood at the counter and did not move. The people in line began to shift restlessly, and one man said loudly, "Just give her the damned certificate already. We have business to conduct." The young clerk returned 20 minutes later, breathless and carrying a ledger. The head clerk took it and flipped through the pages, and Fenna watched his expression go from irritation to something darker. He read the entry in the ledger, looked at the stone, read the entry again, and then closed the ledger with more force than necessary. "The carving is accurate," he said through gritted teeth. "Then I am free," Fenna said, "and you will issue me a certificate stating that." The head clerk stared at her, and for a moment Fenna thought he was going to refuse, but then he turned and barked at the younger clerk to prepare a certificate of registration. The younger clerk brought out a form and began to fill it in, copying the information from the stone, and Fenna watched every stroke of the pen to make sure he did not change a single word. When the certificate was finished, the head clerk stamped it with the county seal and handed it to Fenna with a look that could have curdled milk. "You are registered as a free person," he said. "Do not lose this." Fenna took the certificate and folded it carefully, tucking it into the inner pocket of her coat. She wrapped the stone back in its canvas, lifted it, and turned to leave. As she walked out of the office, she heard the murmur of voices behind her, and she caught fragments of conversation. "Can you believe they tried to deny her? And 3 times they lost her papers. That is not an accident." She carried the stone home and set it on her table, and then she sat down and let herself shake. She had won. She had actually won. But the victory felt precarious, like something that could still be taken away if she let her guard down, and she knew that Theron Hendry would not accept this quietly. He had been profiting from her uncertain status for 9 months, and now that status was resolved. She was free. She could refuse his demands. She could take legal action if he tried to coerce her. And that meant he had lost his leverage. Fenna spent the afternoon reinforcing the lock on her door. Alder came by that evening, carrying a satchel and a wary expression. Fenna opened the door and he stepped inside, glancing around as though checking to make sure she was safe. "I heard the clerks accepted the stone," he said. "They did." Fenna gestured to the certificate, which she had pinned to the wall next to her fireplace. "After a great deal of arguing." "Thank you. I do not think I said that enough yesterday. You said it enough." Alder set his satchel down and pulled out a small package wrapped in cloth. "I brought you something." Fenna unwrapped the cloth and found a thick wedge of cheese, a loaf of dark bread, and a jar of honey. She looked up at him, confused. "You are too thin," Alder said bluntly. "You have been spending all your coin on filing fees and you are not eating enough. Take it." Fenna felt her throat tighten. She had not realized how much the constant worry had worn her down until someone noticed. She set the food on the table and said, "You do not have to do this. I know." Alder sat down in the chair across from her, uninvited but not unwelcome. "But I want to." Fenna sat down as well, and for a moment they just looked at each other. Alder's face was hard to read, all sharp angles and serious eyes, but there was a gentleness in the way he moved that made her feel less alone. "Why did you help me?" she asked. "You do not know me." Alder was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "My mother was bonded labor. She worked in a textile mill for 7 years, and when her bond ended, the mill owner claimed she had stolen fabric and extended her contract another 3 years as restitution. She had not stolen anything. He just wanted to keep her because she was the fastest spinner he had. She died in the mill before the second contract ended." Fenna felt her chest tighten. "I am sorry. It was a long time ago." Alder's voice was flat, but his hands were clenched on the table. "But I have not forgotten what it is like to watch someone fight for their freedom and lose because the people with power decided paperwork was too inconvenient. When I saw you at the clerk's office, I thought of her, and I decided I was not going to watch it happen again." Fenna reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. Alder looked down at their hands, and then he turned his palm up and laced his fingers through hers. They sat like that for a long moment, not speaking, and Fenna felt something shift between them, a connection that was fragile and new but also solid, like the stone he had carved. "You think Theron Hendry will come after me?" she asked quietly. "Yes," Alder said. "Men like him do not give up easily, but you have the certificate now and the stone. If he tries anything, you have proof. Proof did not stop him before. Proof on parchment that could vanish did not stop him. Proof carved in stone is different." Alder squeezed her hand. "And you are not alone anymore." Fenna looked at him, at this quiet man who had appeared in her life with a chisel and a sense of justice, and she felt something warm unfurl in her chest. She did not know what to call it yet, but it felt like hope. Theron Hendry came to her door 2 days later. Fenna was outside splitting firewood when she saw him riding up the lane on a tall bay horse, accompanied by 2 men she recognized as his overseers. She set the axe down and wiped her hands on her trousers, and she made herself stand still as Hendry dismounted and walked toward her. He was a broad man in his 50s, with a florid face and eyes like flint, and he carried himself with the confidence of someone who had never been told no. "Fenna," he said, and his voice was jovial in a way that made her skin crawl. "I hear you have been causing trouble at the county hall." "I have been claiming what is mine," Fenna said. "That is not trouble." Hendry's smile did not waver. Now, let us not be unpleasant. I came to discuss your contract." "My contract ended last spring. I have the certificate to prove it." "Ah, yes, the certificate." Hendry pulled a folded piece of parchment from his coat and held it up. "The problem is, I have a contract here that says otherwise. You signed an extension, remember? Another year of labor in exchange for lodging and meals." "I signed no such thing," Fenna said. "That is a forgery." Hendry's smile sharpened. "That is a serious accusation. Do you have proof it is a forgery?" "You have proof it is not." Hendry's eyes narrowed, and the joviality dropped from his voice like a shed skin. "Listen to me, girl. I own half this county. I have friends in the magistrate's office, friends on the county council, friends who do not take kindly to orcs making trouble. You can play your games with stones and certificates all you want, but at the end of the day, you are still an orc and I am still a landowner. Who do you think they will believe?" Fenna felt her pulse spike, but she kept her voice steady. "They will believe the law, and the law says I am free. The law says whatever I pay it to say." Hendry stepped closer, and Fenna smelled sweat and horse and the sour tang of wine on his breath. "You owe me a year of labor and you are going to fulfill it. If you do not, I will have you arrested for breach of contract and theft of wages. You have paid me no wages. Exactly. Theft. Hendry's smile was vicious. Now, are you going to come quietly, or do I need to have my men convince you? The two overseers moved closer, their hands resting on the clubs at their belts. Fenna looked at them and then at Hendry, and she felt a cold fury settle over her. She had spent 9 months fighting for her freedom, and she was not going to give it up now. "I am not going anywhere," she said. Hendry's face darkened. "Then you will be arrested. On what grounds? I have a certificate from the county hall. A certificate obtained through fraud. That stone carving is not a legal document, and I will see it thrown out." Hendry gestured to his overseers. "Take her." The overseers stepped forward, and Fenna grabbed the axe from where it leaned against the woodpile. She did not raise it, but she held it in a way that made her intent clear. "Touch me and I will defend myself," she said. The overseers hesitated, and Hendry's face went purple. "You are threatening me." "I am stating a fact," Fenna said. "I am a free person. You have no right to lay hands on me. If you try, it is assault, and I will respond accordingly." Hendry stared at her, and for a moment Fenna thought he was going to order his men forward anyway, but then a voice called out from the lane. "Is there a problem here?" Fenna turned and saw Alder walking toward them, and behind him were 3 other men she recognized from the town members of the Craftsmen's Guild, judging by the tools they carried. Alder's expression was calm, but there was something hard in his eyes that made even Hendry pause. "This is private business," Hendry said. "It does not look private," Alder said. He stopped a few feet away, his gaze moving from Hendry to the overseers to Fenna. "It looks like you are trying to coerce a free woman into labor she does not owe." "She owes me a year under contract," Hendry snapped. "Show me the contract," Alder said. Hendry held up the parchment and Alder took it. He read it slowly, his expression unchanging, and then he handed it back. "This is a forgery," Alder said. "You are not a magistrate. You have no authority to make that determination." "No," Alder agreed. "But I am a master stonemason, and I know forgeries when I see them. The signature on this document does not match the signature on the stone I carved, which was copied directly from the magistrate's ledger. If you want to claim this is legitimate, you will have to take it to the magistrate and have him verify it." Hendry's jaw worked. "I will do exactly that." "Good," Alder said. "And while you do, I suggest you keep your hands off Fenna. She is a free person, and if you try to detain her without legal cause, the guild will file a complaint with the county council." Hendry looked at the men standing behind Alder, and Fenna saw the calculation in his eyes. He was outnumbered, and more importantly, he was outmaneuvered. The guild had influence, and if they made noise about his attempt to coerce Fenna, it would bring attention he did not want. "This is not over," Hendry said finally. He turned and stalked back to his horse, his overseers following. They mounted and rode away, and Fenna let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. Alder turned to her. "Are you all right?" "I am now," Fenna said. She set the axe down, and her hands were shaking. "How did you know to come?" "I did not. I was coming to check on you, and I saw Hendry's horse. I thought you might need help." Alder glanced at the other guild members. They thought the same. One of the men, a grizzled carpenter with a gray beard, nodded to Fenna. "We do not like bullies, and Hendry is a bully." Fenna felt her throat tighten again, and she nodded her thanks. The guild members drifted away after a few more minutes, leaving her alone with Alder. He stood with his hands in his pockets, looking at her with that same serious expression. "He is going to take this to the magistrate," Fenna said. "He is going to try to have the stone declared invalid." "I know," Alder said, "and we will be ready for him." "How?" "By making sure the magistrate knows that invalidating the stone means invalidating every legal marker I have ever carved." Alder's voice was calm, but there was steel in it. "And by making sure the guild stands behind you. Hendry has power, but he does not have the guild, and the guild has more influence than he thinks." Fenna looked at him, at this man who had carved her freedom into stone and who was now willing to risk his own standing to defend it, and she felt something crack open inside her. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, burying her face in his shoulder. Alder went still for a moment, and then his arms came up and he held her, steady and solid. "Thank you," she whispered. "You do not have to thank me," Alder said. His voice was low and she felt it rumble in his chest. "You should never have had to fight this hard." They stood like that for a long moment, and when Fenna finally pulled back, she saw something in Alder's eyes that she had not seen before. It was soft and fierce at the same time, and it made her heart race. "Stay for dinner," she said. Alder smiled, a small, rare thing that transformed his face. "I would like that." They ate together in her small house, and they talked about everything and nothing, his work as a stonemason, her plans for what she would do now that she was truly free, the small absurdities of life in Millridge. Alder was not a man of many words, but the words he did speak were thoughtful and true, and Fenna found herself leaning closer to catch everyone. When the fire burned low and the night grew late, Alder stood to leave and Fenna walked him to the door. "Will you come by tomorrow?" she asked. "If you want me to," Alder said. "I do." Alder nodded, and then he hesitated as though he wanted to say something else. Fenna waited, and finally he said, "You are very brave." Fenna felt her cheeks warm. "I do not feel brave. Bravery is not the absence of fear," Alder said. "It is doing what must be done despite it. You have been doing that for 9 months. Fenna reached out and took his hand, and she squeezed it. "So have you." Alder looked down at their joined hands, and then he lifted hers and pressed his lips to her knuckles, a gesture so gentle and unexpected that Fenna's breath caught. He released her hand and left, and Fenna stood in the doorway watching him walk away until he disappeared into the darkness. The magistrate called a hearing 3 days later. Fenna received the summons in the morning, delivered by a nervous-looking clerk who would not meet her eyes. The hearing was scheduled for the following afternoon at the county hall, and Theron Hendry had filed a formal complaint claiming that the stone carving was not a valid legal document, and that Fenna was in breach of her bonded labor contract. Fenna read the summons twice, her stomach churning, and then she walked to Alder's workshop. The workshop was a large timber building at the edge of town, filled with slabs of stone in various stages of carving. Alder was working on a gravestone, his chisel moving with precise, rhythmic strikes, and he looked up when Fenna entered. He saw her expression and set the chisel down immediately. "What happened?" Fenna handed him the summons. Alder read it, his jaw tightening, and then he folded the paper and gave it back. "We expected this," he said. "I know, but I did not expect it to feel so terrifying." Fenna sank onto a bench and put her head in her hands. "What if the magistrate rules against me? What if he says the stone is not valid?" "Then we appeal to the regional court," Alder said. He sat down beside her close enough that their shoulders touched. "And if that does not work, we appeal to the capital. We will keep fighting until we win. And if we never win, we will." Alder's voice was firm. "Because the law is on your side, and because I will not stop until it is enforced." Fenna turned to look at him, and she saw the determination in his eyes, the absolute certainty that she deserved justice. She thought about the hours he had spent carving her freedom into stone, the way he had stood up to Hendry, the way he had brought her food and companionship and hope when she had none left. She thought about the way her heart lifted every time he walked into a room, and the way his rare smiles made her feel like the sun had come out. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. And do not tell me it is because of your mother. This is more than that." Alder was quiet for a long moment, and then he said, "Because you deserve to be free, and because I cannot stand the thought of you being hurt. You barely know me. I know enough." Alder reached out and tucked a strand of her dark hair behind her ear, his fingers brushing her cheek. "I know you are strong and stubborn and kind. I know you have fought for 9 months without giving up. I know you split your own firewood and mend your own roof and do not ask for help even when you need it. And I know that when I am near you, I feel like I am doing something that matters." Fenna's breath hitched. "Alder, you do not have to say anything," Alder said. "I just wanted you to know." Fenna took his hand and pressed it to her cheek, and then she turned her head and kissed his palm. Alder's eyes widened, and Fenna saw the vulnerability in them, the hope and the fear. She leaned forward and kissed him, soft and tentative, and Alder made a sound in the back of his throat and kissed her back. His hands came up to frame her face, careful and reverent, and Fenna felt like she was falling and being caught at the same time. When they finally pulled apart, Alder rested his forehead against hers, his breath warm on her lips. "I have wanted to do that since the first time I saw you," he admitted. Fenna laughed, shaky and breathless. "You should have. I did not want to presume. You had enough people trying to take things from you." "You are not taking," Fenna said. "You are giving, and I want you to keep giving." Alder smiled, and it was like watching the sun rise. They sat together in his workshop, hands clasped, and Fenna thought that even if the hearing went badly, even if Hendry won, she had this moment. She had him, and that was something no one could carve away. The hearing was held in the great hall of the county building, a high-ceilinged room with wooden benches and narrow windows that let in thin streams of winter light. Fenna sat at one of the long tables with Alder beside her, and across the room Theron Hendry sat with a lawyer, a sleek man in expensive clothes who looked at Fenna like she was a problem to be solved. The magistrate, a stern-faced man named Corwin Roth, sat at the high desk at the front of the room, and behind him were the county clerks, including the head clerk who had tried to deny Fenna's stone. Magistrate Roth called the hearing to order, and Hendry's lawyer stood up. "Your Honor, we are here because the defendant, Fenna Cray, has obtained a fraudulent document claiming her freedom from bonded labor, and she has used that document to evade her legal obligations to my client. We ask that the court declare the document invalid and order Miss Cray to fulfill the terms of her contract." "The contract is a forgery," Fenna said, standing up. Her voice shook slightly, but she made herself keep going. "I never signed an extension. My bond ended last spring, and I have fulfilled every requirement of the original agreement." Hendry's lawyer smiled, a thin, unpleasant expression. "Do you have proof that the contract is a forgery?" "I have proof that my bond ended," Fenna said. She gestured to Alder, who stood and carried the stone slab to the front of the room. He set it on the desk in front of Magistrate Roth, and the magistrate leaned forward to read the carving. "This is a stone," the lawyer said, "not a legal document." "It is a copy of a legal document," Alder said. "Carved directly from the entry in your ledger, Magistrate Roth. I was given permission to copy it after the county clerks lost Miss Cray's parchment papers 3 times. The magistrate's eyebrows rose. 3 times? "Yes, Your Honor," Fenna said. "I came to the clerk's office in spring, summer, and autumn. Each time I was told my papers had been lost and I would need to refile. The 4th time, Master Xan carved the record in stone so it could not be lost again." Magistrate Roth looked at the head clerk, who shifted uncomfortably. "Is this true?" "There were some administrative issues," the head clerk said stiffly, "but they have been resolved." "Administrative issues," the magistrate repeated. He looked back at the stone and his expression hardened. This carving is accurate. I recognize the entry from my own ledger. Why was this woman's paperwork lost 3 times? The head clerk's mouth opened and closed. It was an oversight. 3 times is not an oversight, Magistrate Roth said. 3 times is negligence, or worse. He turned to Hendry's lawyer. Do you have proof that Miss Cray signed a contract extension? The lawyer produced the parchment and the magistrate took it. He read it carefully, and then he looked at the stone again, comparing the signatures. Fenna held her breath. These signatures do not match, Magistrate Roth said finally. They are close enough, the lawyer argued. Handwriting changes over time. Not this much. The magistrate set the parchment down and fixed Hendry with a hard look. Mr. Hendry, did you forge this contract? Hendry's face went red. Of course not. Miss Cray must have signed it and forgotten. I did not forget, Fenna said. I never signed it. Magistrate Roth looked at the stone again, and then at the certificate Fenna had received from the county hall. He was quiet for a long moment, and Fenna could see him weighing the evidence. Finally, he spoke. This court finds that the contract extension is invalid. The signature is inconsistent with the original documents, and Mr. Hendry has provided no corroborating evidence that Miss Cray agreed to the terms. Furthermore, this court finds that the stone carving is a valid record of Miss Cray's manumission. Master Xan is a certified guild craftsman, and his work is used for legal markers throughout this county. To deny the validity of this carving would be to deny the validity of every boundary stone, every gravestone, and every cornerstone he has made, which is clearly absurd. Fenna felt her knees go weak. Alder's hand came to her elbow, steadying her. Miss Cray is hereby recognized as a free person, Magistrate Roth continued. Her bond to Mr. Hendry ended on the 5th of Greening, as recorded. Any attempt to coerce her into labor or to claim otherwise will be considered unlawful detainment and will be prosecuted accordingly. Hendry shot to his feet. This is an outrage. You cannot. I can and I have. Magistrate Roth's voice was cold. Furthermore, Mr. Hendry, I am ordering an investigation into the repeated loss of Miss Cray's paperwork. If it is found that you or anyone acting on your behalf interfered with the county records, you will face charges of obstruction of justice. Hendry's face went from red to white. His lawyer put a hand on his arm, murmuring something Fenna could not hear, and Hendry jerked away. He turned and stormed out of the hall, his lawyer hurrying after him. Magistrate Roth looked at Fenna, and his expression softened slightly. I apologize for the difficulties you have faced, Miss Cray. The failures of this office are inexcusable. I am directing the head clerk to ensure that no other bonded laborers suffer similar treatment. Thank you, Your Honor, Fenna said. Her voice came out hoarse. The magistrate nodded, and then he looked at Alder. Master Xan, I commend your craftsmanship and your integrity. The stone will be kept in the county archives as an official record. However, I believe it should also serve a greater purpose. What purpose? Alder asked. I am ordering it to be set into the wall of this building in the public square where everyone can see it. Magistrate Roth's eyes gleamed. Let it be a reminder that freedom is not a privilege to be granted or withheld by the powerful. It is a right, and it will be protected. Fenna felt tears prick her eyes, and she blinked them back. Alder looked at her, and she saw the same emotion reflected in his face, relief and triumph, and something deeper, something that made her heart ache in the best way. The hearing ended, and Fenna and Alder walked out of the county hall into the cold sunlight. A small crowd had gathered in the square, people who had heard about the hearing and come to see the outcome, and when Fenna appeared there was a ripple of murmurs. Someone called out, "Did you win?" And Fenna nodded, unable to speak. The crowd broke into applause. Fenna stood there, stunned, as people she barely knew came forward to congratulate her. A woman who ran the bakery pressed a loaf of bread into her hands. A man who worked at the mill clapped Alder on the shoulder and said, "Well done, lad." The grizzled carpenter from the guild grinned and said, "That stone is going to be here long after Hendry is dust." "Good." Fenna looked at Alder, and he was smiling, that rare, brilliant smile that made her heart turn over. She reached for his hand and he took it, lacing their fingers together in front of everyone. "We did it," she said. "You did it," Alder replied. "I just gave you the tools." "No," Fenna said. "We did it together." 2 weeks later, the stone was set into the wall of the county hall, just to the right of the main entrance where everyone who came to do business would see it. Alder supervised the installation himself, making sure the mortar was perfect and the stone was level, and when it was finished he stepped back and looked at it with satisfaction. Fenna stood beside him, her hand in his, and she read her name carved in stone. Fenna Cray, free. "It looks permanent," she said. "It is permanent," Alder replied. "That stone will be here for centuries." Fenna thought about that, about her name and her freedom outlasting her lifetime, and she felt a swell of emotion so strong it nearly knocked her over. She turned to Alder, and she saw him watching her with an expression that was soft and unguarded. "I love you," she said. The words came out before she could think about them, but once they were spoken, she knew they were true. Alder's eyes widened, and then he smiled, and he pulled her close and kissed her in front of the county hall, in front of the stone, in front of anyone who cared to watch. "I love you too," he said when they broke apart. "I have loved you since the day I saw you refuse to be erased." They stood there for a long time, wrapped in each other, and the stone stood behind them, silent and eternal. The investigation into Theron Hendry took 3 months, and it uncovered a web of corruption that reached further than anyone had expected. Hendry had been bribing the county clerks to lose the paperwork of bonded laborers whose contracts had ended, allowing him to continue exploiting their labor without pay. 5 other people came forward with stories similar to Fenna's, and the scandal grew until even Hendry's friends on the county council could not protect him. He was charged with fraud, obstruction of justice, and unlawful detainment, and his assets were seized to pay restitution to the people he had wronged. Fenna received a settlement that was more money than she had ever seen in her life, and she used it to buy a small plot of land on the edge of Millridge. She built a house there with Alder's help, a sturdy timber structure with a wide porch and a stone foundation that Alder carved with the same care he had used for her freedom papers. They moved in together in the spring, a year after the day Fenna had first stood at the clerk's counter and been told her papers were lost. They were married in the summer, a simple ceremony in the town square with the stone as their witness. Fenna wore a dress the color of cream, and Alder wore his guild medallion, and they spoke their vows in front of the friends and neighbors who had supported them. The grizzled carpenter played a fiddle, and the woman from the bakery brought a cake, and the magistrate himself attended to offer his congratulations. Fenna and Alder danced in the square as the sun set, and when the stars came out they walked home together, hand in hand. Their house was small but comfortable, filled with the things they had built and made together, furniture Alder had carved, quilts Fenna had sewn, a garden they tended side by side. They lay in bed that night, tangled together, and Alder traced the line of Fenna's jaw with his fingertips. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I had not gone to the clerk's office that day?" he asked. "Yes," Fenna said, "but I try not to. It makes me too sad." "I think you would have found a way," Alder said. "You are too stubborn to give up." Fenna laughed and kissed him. "Maybe. But I am glad I did not have to find out." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other, and in the morning they woke to the sound of birds and the light filtering through the window. Fenna got up and made breakfast while Alder stoked the fire, and they ate together at their table, talking about the work they had planned for the day. It was an ordinary morning, unremarkable in every way except for the fact that it was theirs, freely chosen and freely lived. Fenna thought about the stone in the town square, about her name carved in granite for all the world to see, and she thought about how strange and wonderful it was that something as simple as permanence could be such a profound act of love. Alder had given her that. He had looked at her erasure and answered it with stone, and in doing so he had given her not just her freedom but her future. Years passed, measured in seasons and harvests, and the slow, steady accumulation of a life well lived. Fenna and Alder worked their land, growing vegetables and raising chickens, and they became fixtures of Millridge, known and respected by everyone. Fenna helped other bonded laborers navigate the legal process of claiming their freedom, using her own experience to guide them, and Alder carved markers for the ones who succeeded, small stones that echoed the larger one in the square. They had a daughter in their 3rd year of marriage, a girl with Fenna's green skin and Alder's serious eyes, and they named her Kira. She grew up running through the fields and climbing trees, fearless and bright, and when she was old enough to ask questions, Fenna took her to the town square and showed her the stone. "This is my freedom," Fenna said, tracing the letters with her finger. "Your father carved it so that no one could take it away." Kira looked up at the stone, her small face thoughtful. "Why would anyone want to take it away?" "Because some people think power is more important than justice," Fenna said, "but your father taught me that the truth is stronger than power. As long as we carve it deep enough." Kira reached out and touched the stone, her fingers following the same path Fenna's had taken. "I want to carve things too," she said. Alder, standing behind them, smiled. "Then I will teach you," and he did. Kira learned the stonemason's trade at her father's side, and by the time she was 15 she could carve letters as cleanly as Alder could. She made her first legal marker at 17, a boundary stone for a farmer's field, and Alder inspected it with the same critical eye he used for his own work. When he pronounced it perfect, Kira beamed, and Fenna felt her heart swell with pride. The stone in the town square became a landmark, a place where people met and made promises and told stories. Children climbed on it, and lovers carved their initials near it, and travelers stopped to read the words and ask about the orc woman whose freedom had been written in granite. Fenna heard the stories people told about her, some of them true and some of them exaggerated, and she did not bother to correct them. What mattered was that the stone was there, solid and real, a testament to the fact that justice could win if you fought hard enough. Alder grew older, his dark hair turning silver and his hands gnarled with years of work, but his skill never faded. He carved gravestones and cornerstones and markers for every important event in Millridge, and people said that a building was not truly complete until Alder Xan had set his mark on it. Fenna grew older too, her skin weathered and her strength tempered by time, but she never lost the fire that had kept her fighting for 9 months. She became a voice for the voiceless, a defender of the forgotten, and when she died at the age of 73, the entire town came to her funeral. Alder carved her gravestone himself, a task that took him a month because he wanted every letter to be perfect. He set it in the plot beside their house, under the oak tree they had planted together, and he visited it every day until his own death 5 years later. Kira buried him beside Fenna, and she carved his stone with the same care he had taught her, and when it was finished she stepped back and looked at the 2 markers side by side. Fenna Cray, the first one, read, "Beloved wife, mother, and fighter for justice." Alder Xan, the second, read, beloved husband, father, and master of stone. He carved the truth so it could not be erased. Kira stood there for a long time, tears streaming down her green cheeks, and then she walked back to the house and picked up her father's tools. She had her own work to do, her own stones to carve, and she knew that as long as she kept carving, as long as she kept writing the truth in granite, her parents' legacy would endure. In the town square, the stone that Alder had carved so many years ago still stood, weathered but unbroken. People still stopped to rate it, still told the story of the orc woman whose freedom had been lost 3 times and carved in stone the 4th. And every time someone read those words, every time someone traced the letters with their fingers, Fenna's name lived again, permanent and unshakable. A reminder that some things cannot be erased no matter how hard the powerful try. The stone stood, and the truth stood with it, and that was enough.